They say a happy marriage is built on trust, but I've learned it's also built on what you don't know. And sometimes, what you don't know is sitting in the back of a closet, waiting to destroy you. What I found that day didn't just break my heart. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my wife. My name is Ryan, and I've been married to Lauren for 12 years. I always thought we had a great relationship. Maybe not the fairy tale romance people brag about, but solid, stable, real. I work as a financial analyst, a job that makes me obsess over patterns, details, and things that don't add up. Lauren, on the other hand, has always been the sentimental one. She keeps old movie stubs, travel souvenirs, and anniversary cards in little memory boxes tucked away around the house. I used to think it was sweet, until I found the box she never meant for me to see. It happened when I was clearing out our guest room, finally converting it into a home office. Tucked deep in Lauren's closet, behind winter coats and shoeboxes of old holiday decorations, I found one box that didn't belong. It was worn, the cardboard edges slightly frayed, as if it had been handled more than the others. I almost left it alone. Almost. I wish I had. Inside, there wasn't the usual collection of love notes or nostalgic trinkets. At first glance, it looked like a random assortment of small items: a matchbook, a keycard, a movie ticket stub, a cocktail napkin with writing on it. But as I sifted through them, a pattern emerged. Each item was neatly bundled, with a date written on a small piece of paper. And that's when I noticed there were 12 of them. One for each year we had been married. Each one tied to a different man. I sat there, my hands shaking as I laid everything out on the floor. A hotel key from a place we never stayed. A pressed flower that wasn't from our anniversaries. A receipt for dinner at a steakhouse I had never taken her to. My mind refused to accept it, but the math was undeniable. Lauren had been collecting her affairs like souvenirs. A coaster from a bar, initials scrawled on the back. A photo of a street corner in a city she once visited alone, or so I thought. A handwritten note that simply said, "Until next time." I felt sick. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a carefully maintained record of every time she betrayed me. A collection of men she had loved, even if just for a moment, and I had been too blind to see it. I closed the box and stared at the wall, my heartbeat drowning out everything else. My first instinct was to confront her, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But as I sat there, forcing myself to breathe, a different thought took over. Who was the most recent one? Because if there was one thing I knew about Lauren, it was that she never let go of her keepsakes. Which meant whoever had been her last souvenir was probably still in her life. I wasn't just going to be another forgotten memento in her hidden box of betrayals. I was going to find out exactly how deep this went. And then, I was going to make sure Lauren finally paid for every single year. They say when you stare into the abyss stares back. I always thought that was just a dramatic way of describing existential crises. But sitting there, staring at 12 years of my wife's betrayals laid out in front of me, I understood it perfectly. That box wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a timeline of lies. A carefully curated museum of every man she had ever chosen over me. And now, I had a choice. I could confront Lauren immediately, demand an explanation, scream, cry, do all the things that betrayed husbands are supposed to do. But that's what she would expect. She had been hiding this for over a decade. She had gotten away with it because I had never questioned her, never looked beyond the surface. That was over. If I was going to destroy the life she built on lies, I needed to do it right. And that meant finding out everything before she even realized I knew. I spent the next few hours studying each item in the shoebox, making notes on anything that stood out. Some were vague. Matchbooks from restaurants, ticket stubs, handwritten notes with only initials or dates. But a few were much more telling. A hotel keycard from a place called Westfield Inn. A cocktail napkin with "Last night was perfect," tea, scrawled in black ink. A Polaroid of a street sign in a part of the city Lauren had no reason to be in. A receipt from a jewelry store for a necklace I had never seen her wear. And the worst one? A recent parking receipt. It was dated just 2 months ago. That meant her latest affair wasn't just in the past. It was ongoing. That's when I realized the last man in the box wasn't just a memory. He was still in her life. Lauren had always had a structured schedule. She worked part-time in event planning, which meant she had flexible hours and plenty of business meetings that I had never questioned before. I started paying attention. She had certain days where she was gone for longer than usual, certain excuses that repeated, and, most importantly, she had a few places she went that never quite made sense. One of them? Westfield Inn, the same name on the hotel keycard from the shoebox. That was it. That was the connection I needed. Lauren wasn't just a cheater in the past. She was cheating right now, and I was going to catch her in the act. I needed hard proof, the kind she couldn't talk her way out of. Text can be faked, receipts can be explained away, but being caught in the moment? Undeniable. I checked her calendar. She had one of her meetings scheduled for Friday night. She had already told me she'd be home late. I told her that was fine. I didn't argue. I didn't question. I just waited. And when Friday came, I followed her. I watched from a distance as she drove to the same hotel, the same place from the keycard in her box of betrayals. She wasn't alone. A man was already there, waiting for her in the parking lot. Tall, confident, younger than me. I felt my chest tighten as she kissed him right there in the open, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was watching. I took out my phone, snapped the picture, and just like that, Lauren's perfectly crafted lies were about to come crashing down. There are moments in life where everything slows down. Not in a poetic, cinematic way, but in a way that makes you feel like you're floating outside of yourself, watching the wreckage unfold in real time. That's exactly how it felt when I saw my wife kiss another man in the parking lot of a hotel. I always thought that if I ever caught a partner cheating, I'd explode, that I'd storm into the scene and make a spectacle. But the reality was different. I felt cold, detached, like I wasn't even inside my own body anymore. I watched as Lauren parked her car, stepping out with a practiced ease that suggested she'd done this many times before. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around nervously or check over her shoulder. No, she walked toward him like it was the most natural thing in the world. And him? He was younger. That realization stung more than I expected. I couldn't make out every detail from where I was, but I saw enough. Tall, athletic build, a certain arrogance in the way he stood, as if he knew exactly how much power he held in this moment. Who the hell was he? Lauren stopped in front of him, and for a second, I wondered if maybe I was imagining things. If maybe this was a business meeting after all, some last-minute event planning session. But then she smiled. That specific smile. The kind she used to give me when we were first dating. The kind that made me fall in love with her. And then, without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him. I felt something inside me snap. There it was. Proof. Not suspicion. Not paranoia. Not misinterpreted signs or coincidental hotel receipts. Undeniable, gut-wrenching proof. I took out my phone, hands steady in a way that almost disturbed me. A single picture. That's all I needed. I zoomed in, making sure to capture the moment. The way her hands rested on his chest, the way his arms wrapped around her waist, the complete absence of guilt on either of their faces. They had no idea I was watching. They had no idea everything they built in secrecy was about to collapse. I stayed there, hidden behind the row of parked cars, watching as they exchanged words, laughing like two people who had all the time in the world. Then, with an ease that made my blood boil, they turned toward the hotel entrance. She wasn't just meeting him for dinner. She wasn't just catching up. She was sleeping with him. I clenched my fists, willing myself to breathe. Now wasn't the time to confront her. That would be emotional, messy. It would give her room to spin the story, to manipulate her way out of it. No, I needed to be smart. So, instead of storming in, I did what I had trained myself to do for years. I analyzed the situation, broke it down like a problem that needed solving. I wasn't about to let my wife's latest conquest be just another nameless entry in her shoebox of betrayals. I needed to know exactly who he was. I snapped another picture, making sure to get his face. One picture of a kiss was good, but a full record of their affair? That would be undeniable. I pulled up the hotel's website on my phone, checking if they had a rewards program or online reservation system. Most places did, and most people, when they were careless, left a digital trail. A few clicks, a quick check, and there it was. A reservation under Lauren's name. They had a room booked for the night. I exhaled slowly. That was all I needed. I walked back to my car, my heart pounding not from anger but from clarity. The kind of clarity that turns you into someone different. I dialed my lawyer, Greg, the moment I sat down behind the wheel. He answered on the second ring. I laid it all out. The pictures, the reservation, the pattern of affairs that spanned 12 years of my marriage. Greg didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply said, "This is more than enough. We're moving forward." Lauren had no idea, but her world was already caving in. I didn't go home right away. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, staring at the hotel entrance, waiting for some sign that maybe she would change her mind, that maybe she would walk out of that place before stepping into that room with him. She never did. So, I drove home, the shoebox of secrets still sitting where I had left it, and I started preparing for what came next. Because this wasn't just about ending our marriage. This was about making sure Lauren regretted every single choice she made. People think the worst part of being cheated on is the discovery. They assume that the moment you catch them, when the illusion shatters, is when the pain peaks. But that's not true at all. The worst part is what comes after. The silence. The waiting. The uncertainty between knowing the truth and figuring out how to use it. That's where the real suffering lies. And that's where I found myself after discovering Lauren's box of infidelities and watching her meet her latest lover in a hotel parking lot. I had proof now. The pictures of her and him together, the reservation under her name, the shoebox filled with mementos from every year she had spent deceiving me. I had already spoken to my lawyer, who was preparing everything to make sure she wouldn't get away with anything in the divorce. I had expected this to be a clean execution. Gather the evidence, serve the papers, watch her world crumble just as she had crumbled mine. But I had underestimated something far more dangerous than infidelity. The mind of a woman who had done this before and perfected the art of getting away with it. That realization started as a whisper at the back of my mind, a subtle sense that something didn't quite fit. Lauren wasn't acting the way I expected. That morning, when she walked into the kitchen, there was no nervousness, no guilt, no subtle signs of a woman who had just spent the night with another man behind her husband's back. She was calm, too calm. She moved through her routine effortlessly, smiling at me the same way she always had, making coffee, checking her phone, humming a song under her breath. It was as if she hadn't just committed the ultimate betrayal. For a moment, I doubted myself. Maybe I had overestimated her capacity for guilt. Maybe she had been doing this for so long that it no longer affected her. But there was something else. A strange stillness in the air. A sensation creeping up my spine that told me she wasn't just unaware of what was coming. She was prepared for it. I wasn't just exposing her affair. I was stepping onto a battlefield she had been fighting on long before I ever realized there was a war. That suspicion deepened when I got the call. A restricted number, one I wouldn't have normally answered, but something in me told me I needed to. The moment I picked up, everything changed. I had expected silence or some automated spam message, but instead, I heard a voice I recognized immediately. The man from the hotel parking lot. The man my wife had kissed like she belonged to him. And now, he was calling me. He knew what I had seen. He didn't try to deny it, didn't attempt to cover up what had happened. But what he said next made my blood run cold. He wasn't reaching out to apologize, or to make some pathetic excuse for what they had done. He was warning me, telling me that I had no idea who I was dealing with, that Lauren wasn't just an unfaithful wife, that I wasn't the first husband to be standing where I was now, and if I wasn't careful, I wouldn't be the last. For the first time since finding that shoebox, I felt like I had lost control of the situation. I had assumed I was the one hunting her down, setting the trap, exposing her lies. But now, I wasn't sure if I had ever really been ahead. Had Lauren already planned for this? Had she already positioned herself in a way where she could slip through the cracks the moment I made my move? The thought twisted in my gut like a knife. I hung up, my fingers tightening around my phone as I replayed every moment of the past few weeks in my head. The shoebox wasn't just a sign of her betrayal. It was a pattern, a repeated cycle of deception, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. 12 years, 12 men, each one carefully recorded, each one left behind like a chapter in a book she had written before moving on to the next. And if that was the case, what had happened to the husbands before me? Had they caught her? Had they confronted her? And if they had, why had I never heard anything about it? I suddenly realized that I wasn't just exposing a cheater. I was unraveling something bigger than myself. I wasn't sure what Lauren's endgame was, but for the first time, I wasn't entirely sure I was the one in control anymore. And that terrified me more than anything else. People think catching a cheater is the worst thing that can happen in a marriage. They imagine the heartbreak, the anger, the betrayal. But what they don't consider is what happens when the affair isn't just an affair. What happens when the person you thought you knew has been hiding something far worse? I had spent the past week gathering evidence, tracking patterns, and studying every single item in Lauren's shoebox of secrets. At first, I had focused on her lies, her movements, her digital trail. But then I realized I had been looking at the wrong person. Lauren was careful. Too careful. She had left no real trace of her infidelities except for that shoebox. That wasn't the behavior of someone who had made careless mistakes. That was the behavior of someone who had done this before and had learned exactly how to cover her tracks. That's when I shifted my attention. I stopped looking at Lauren and started looking at the men. I examined every keepsake, every note, every small, insignificant item that she had thought wouldn't raise suspicion. Some of them were vague, a bar napkin with initials, a restaurant receipt, a keycard from a hotel, but a few were specific enough to investigate. And what I found changed everything. Some of these men, they weren't just past lovers. They were missing. At least 2 names matched missing person reports from the last decade. 2 men who had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind families, jobs, lives. No clear evidence of foul play. No bodies ever found. Their cases had gone cold, marked as probable abandonment, as if they had simply walked away and never looked back. But now I wasn't so sure. Lauren hadn't just kept souvenirs. She had collected trophies. I felt my stomach twist as I realized the full implications of what I had stumbled onto. I wasn't just married to a woman who had been cheating on me for years. I was married to someone who had a pattern of getting rid of her problems. And now, I was her problem. I had to know more. I took the next step, the one that I had been dreading. I reached out to one of the wives of the missing men. At first, she didn't respond. Then, finally, a message came through. She didn't just confirm my suspicions. She told me something that made my blood run cold. She had found a shoebox too. And inside, the same pattern. Mementos, dates, keepsakes, a secret record of every affair. A connection between her husband and Lauren. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore. This was something much, much worse. And the worst part? Lauren had never been caught. Until now. And if I wasn't careful, I was going to end up just like the others. People think the worst part of being cheated on is the betrayal, the lies. The moment you realize your spouse has been sneaking around behind your back. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is realizing that you're not the first. That the person you thought you knew has been playing this game for years. And that some of the men who came before you are no longer around to tell their side of the story. That was the reality I was now facing. Lauren's shoebox wasn't just a collection of secrets. It was a pattern. A list of men she had been with, each one carefully cataloged, each one discarded when she was done. And now, after contacting one of the wives of a missing man, I had undeniable proof that some of the men in that box hadn't just left. They had disappeared, and my wife had been involved. I wasn't just dealing with a serial cheater. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. That realization hit me like a freight train. I needed to get out. I couldn't let Lauren know what I had discovered. Not yet. If she had kept this hidden for over a decade, if she had gotten away with whatever had happened to the men before me, then she was smart, calculated, dangerous. And if she thought I was onto her, if she suspected that I knew too much, then I could be next. I needed to move carefully. I made 3 moves that same day. First, I secured my assets. I contacted my lawyer, quietly transferring funds, freezing shared accounts, and ensuring that Lauren would have no financial leverage when I left. I had already planned to divorce her, but now, I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was escaping something I didn't fully understand. Second, I backed up all the evidence. The shoebox, the notes, the photographs, the hotel reservations, and most importantly, the missing person reports that lined up with Lauren's past affairs. I made multiple copies and stored them in different places, one with my lawyer, one in a secure cloud account, and one on a flash drive hidden outside of our home. Third, I acted normal. That was the hardest part. I had to look Lauren in the eyes, eat dinner with her, sleep next to her, knowing what I knew, knowing that if I pushed too soon, I might never get the chance to leave. And then, the moment came. Lauren must have sensed something was off. Maybe it was a change in my routine. Maybe it was the way I had stopped asking questions, stopped playing the role of the clueless husband. But one night, she did something that confirmed every fear I had. She searched my laptop. I had left a dummy file open, something small, harmless, a travel itinerary I had purposely placed as bait. When I checked my activity log, she had opened it. She had been looking for something. She was testing me. That was the last sign I needed. The next morning, before Lauren even woke up, I was gone. I took my most important belongings, left behind everything else, and walked away from the life I had spent years building. I didn't leave a note. I didn't give her a confrontation. I simply disappeared. Because if Lauren had done what I suspected, if she was responsible for more than just broken hearts, then I wasn't going to stick around to find out how my story would end. I wasn't going to be her next souvenir. It's been months since I left. The divorce is finalized. Lauren never found out how much I knew. I've moved to another city, changed my routine, started over in a way I never expected I'd have to. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, how many others were there? And more importantly, where are they now?